everyone, it's Tommy from Bear Gallery. I'm back here at Angelus. You may have seen my other videos I've done with them, doing the Parrot Doc Martens. I did the Shining portraits with Jack Nicholson on some Converses. But today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're doing the Mandalorian. Angelus bought a costume, which is super plain, and the goal is to make it look like it's been through war. So we're gonna add some bullet holes, gashes, scratches, sweat stains, you name it, we're gonna do it. There's plenty of different types of materials to work with. Let's do it. So I've already done a good deal of the pieces of the costume on my own, including the helmet. And we also have this jacket that I finished. It's actually still pretty wet. I used black, dark brown, and beige by Angelus. And when you mix those down with water, I used this sponge and just took all the edges of this coat and made all the edges darker. Just by squeezing this sponge and then slowly diluting with more and more water, it helps it bleed into the canvas materials and make it look super realistic, just like sweat. Maybe this soldier went through some mud as well. I love the way it came out. It's time to move on to the next pieces. Next goal is to make these leather pieces look like they're metal. These metallic pieces, these are the pieces of armor that go on the shoulders and chest and forearms. I've already sanded this with Angelus 400 grit sandpaper, and I've already used Angelus deglazer. Now I'm gonna take a beige color and mix that with some dark brown. I just want to add just some roughness, some kind of texture over the entire thing. And then right after that, I'm going to add the gashes and bullet holes. So, step one, I'm going to mix some beige with some dark brown and start painting this. Alright, so I went ahead and added some nice texture to these panels with some browns, and then I just went and took some metallic bronze, used a sponge, and I kind of just used a tiny amount of paint and rubbed it over the whole surface just to give it a nice sheen to help it make it look metallic. Now what's next is we have this great canvas to add some actual damage to. I want to do some bullet holes and some gashes. So I want to give you guys a step-by-step process for how to paint these bullet holes. I got a few different types going on here, but let me go over the simplest one. So first things first, I take a nice black and just add a circle. We have this dark circle shape. I want to put a shadow on top and then a highlight below. And I like to use a Q-tip because it blends into the leather pretty nicely. Sometimes easier than a brush. So here's my dark brown shadow. I want it to be almost as dark as the center of the bullet hole. And then below that, I'm going to add a highlight with a lighter brown. And without even blending it, it already actually looks pretty convincing. In order to blend these a little bit more, I'm going to blend the shadow into the highlight. Just gently go over them without touching the black. Because if I accidentally touch that wet black paint, it's just going to smear all over the white highlights, and we don't want that. So now that we got the black bullet hole in the center, shadow on top, highlight on bottom, I'm going to use a heat gun so I can add some details. So now what we want to do is add the crack marks. I'm going to grab a smaller paintbrush, and this is a Angelus Rounds 2, my favorite brush. And what really helps it give it extra dimension is if you have shorter crack marks on the top and then longer crack marks on the bottom. And that makes it look like you're kind of looking up at the bullet. Alright, so now that the cracks are complete, I'm going to take a even lighter brown. I'm going to start adding some extra highlights. What really makes artwork pop is when you have your brightest highlight right next to your darkest dark. It's also what I love to do when I'm painting eyes in portraits. And something I do all the time is if I have a little bit too much paint put down on the surface, I just use my finger and like push it in, and I usually get some paint back on my finger, and it actually blends your artwork really nicely just by pushing onto it. It's kind of hard to see where your top shadow is in contrast with the black bullet hole, so we want to add a very hairline little highlight to distinguish where those cracks are so we can see the bullet hole. But generally we want the bottom of the bullet hole to have that big highlight. And since this material is extruding, I want to add another shadow right below that. So I'm going to use a dark brown, just some black with some dark brown, and this defines where the bottom of the bullet hole is. I think it looks pretty cool if you like let it drip down as if the bullet hole has caused the armor to rust. I'm going to push it in because I don't want it to be super noticeable. So now we're gonna add one of our final highlights. As kind of a rule of thumb, when I'm painting realism, it's almost like you always alternate shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight. Even going from the top to bottom of this bullet, we have highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow. It's kind of funny how it always works out like that. All right, so for my final detail here, I'm just gonna take some white with some metallic silver to really give a crazy highlight right at the bottom of this, so we have that crazy contrast between white and black to really draw the viewer in. The highlight on top of a highlight. We're always building from dark to light colors. So generally, if I'm busting out white paint, that means that's the last detail I'm doing on anything. I did start to add some little gray spots. As another rule of thumb, anytime you have something that's just flat, like this is flat black, it looks good to just break up that flatness with just some kind of slightly lighter color. So I'm gonna take a dark gray and just add a couple dots in there just to make it a little more interesting. That's a Mandalorian bullet hole for you folks. Alright, so let's talk about some of these details, why I painted them in certain spots and why I use certain colors. I wanted it to look like paint was chipping towards the bottom of it. This guy's probably punching things and a lot of stuff's hitting the top of this piece of armor, so I want the paint to be chipping on this side. Generally, underneath paint it reveals, from what I've seen in Mandalorian, a dark gray color, and once it gets even more worn down, you get like silver highlights. So I just painted a bunch of dark gray with a pretty mid-sized brush, Angelus filbert number 9. Just kind of focusing on cracks all on the edge. Once I have that dark brown there, actually, sorry, dark gray, then I mixed some white and some silver and painted highlights on top of that. I can actually show you how quick it is. So you make one dark mark, clean your brush, some white and silver, boom, there's some paint chipping. So that's what I mean by working from dark to light. Of course, I wanted there to be some kind of rust effect. Yeah, first thing I did was add all the rust colors with mid-brown and light brown streaks to make it look kind of rusty, worn down. And I wanted to do that first so that I can paint details on top of that. Otherwise, I would have had to paint the bullet holes and then carefully paint that background rust around them. That would have taken more time, so background first, work bigger picture to small picture. So we got the rust for bigger picture and then paint chipping and bullet holes for finer detail stuff. So I'm almost done with the armor. I've done a lot of bullet holes, a lot of rust and paint peeling off. So I'm kind of at the stage where I want to do a final review and think if there's anything cool I can add to this. So I thought some avocado color would be kind of nice for some algae effect, as if nature's kind of growing on top of it because it's old armor. So I use a sponge like I've done for all the backgrounds and just done a little bit of green on some of the armor. Just gonna finish up, add some green moss on the helmet and the rest of the armor. So for the rust and the algae for this whole Mandalorian costume, the sponge has been a saving grace. It's a really great way to just blast through big surfaces. And you can put really tiny amounts of paint on this and do really subtle effects, which is a really nice tool. So something that I recommend is a little bottle of spray. I just put water in it and it helps keep my palette from not drying up when I'm working for like 6-7 hours at a time. Just a couple spritzes every 10 minutes or so and you're good to go. So this helmet came completely flat gray plastic. It didn't look metallic at all. So what I did first was sand the whole surface just with normal Angelus 400 grit sanding paper. And then I used like a knife and then some more heavy sanding to get these scratches. Maybe like a crazy animal scratched the helmet in the back with some claw marks. And then I used some airbrush with different mixtures of Angelus metallic paint. I sprayed some metallic pewter and some metallic bronze. And this gave it this really nice metallic look. And that kind of gave some kind of rust effect. What I want to do is make all of the cracks kind of darker. I think that if I just focus on the cracks, it's going to help me make things look more worn. I think that rust tends to happen in cracks more. And with some sandpaper and different sorts of knives, I made these scratch marks and then added more of that metallic paint around them to make them look really realistic. So we're closing in on this helmet. We're almost done. I actually used a Dremel tool, and that's what I use for a lot of these cut marks. And then after that, we can accentuate those marks with paint. And that's exactly what I want to do right now, is take these cut marks and just add more dark paint strokes to bring these out so that these details can be seen from a distance and not just 6 inches away. It's already looking really good though. Added some algae, a lot of rust. I just want to make this a little bit more noticeable with some paint. Alright, all of the armor is finished. I'm just working on the canvas cloth material now. I'm just going to use this same sponge for all of it. Same concept, I'm just applying a darker color to all the edges. I'm not going to be putting any bullet holes in these pants. I just want like sweat marks, some grass marks, mud marks. That's pretty much it. So let's put this sponge to work. So every time I'm painting a new project, I have this cup of water that I use to clean my brushes, so it just has wastewater in it. But for this project, it's actually been very useful to dip my sponge into it and then just drip that wastewater over all this cloth stuff, and it looks super realistic, like sweat and just stained clothing. Another way to use your wastewater is to actually just start pouring paints into it and make this concoction of thinned out water and paint. And I'm actually just gonna dip these gloves right into here. So this is a cape, and I've actually done a lot of things to it. The first thing I did was take some sandpaper and I frayed the edge. I believe I used 400 grit for that. And then after that, I took an X-Acto knife and I had a cutting pad and I just scratched along the bottom, because this is the bottom of the cape and it's, you know, flying all over the floor, getting ripped up, so that's why I wanted that torn up. And that's also why I applied a lot of my wastewater with a sponge to the bottom of it, and I made it look nice and dirty and muddy and algae-y. Then of course I got some sweat stains around the neck. And then after that, I took an X-Acto knife and I had a cutting pad and I just scratched along the bottom to let it drip down and made sure all the edges are dark. And it looks great. So many times during the course of this project, I found myself finger painting with these gloves on and smearing paint with Q-tips. I actually often use Q-tips. They're great if you have too much paint on your surface and you just kind of want to have some soft edges. Try Q-tips, see if you like it. I used it for these gloves right here to apply the rust. So we have this waist/chest band here that's got some holsters on it. It's all leather. I'm just going to use the sponge again and put on a medium and light brown on top of this to give it some nice wear and tear. I definitely want to focus on the areas where the gun goes in, because that's probably going to be worn down more, so I want all the edges around here to be super worn down. So every time you paint leather, you want to sand it and then use Angelus's leather prepare and deglazer to make sure that the paint can adhere to it. Sometimes when you use cheaper leathers like this costume, it's not genuine leather and this stuff can kind of eat it up. So before you start applying this deglazer to main spots on your piece of work, start on an inconspicuous spot just to see if it starts like deteriorating the material really quickly. And if not, you're good to go. Just apply it to the whole thing. Alright, so we're just about done with the Mandalorian costume. We've gone from head to toe, down to the feet now, got these boots. Very stylish. I think I just need to apply the same concepts as we've done all along. Take the sponge, do some mid-brown on this stuff, and just bring out these sections and add highlights. That'll be it. So when I'm adding distress to certain sections of the shoes, I think that it makes it a lot more interesting for the viewer to see when there's wear and tear where there actually would be wear and tear in real life. So I'm going to add a little bit more of a distress like on the toes, where it's probably kicking around rocks, and maybe the heels too. Alright, so that's a wrap. Every item from this costume has been painted. Can't wait to try it on and see what this looks like. Had a lot of challenges and a lot of fun making this. Just a lot of room for creativity with each little panel that you have. Thank you, Angelus, for having me. Thank you guys for watching. I had a blast customizing this costume for the first time today. If you guys have any questions, hit the comments so I'll come back through and answer those. If you want to see more of my work, you can check it out on Instagram at Bear Gallery. Thank you.